All right, everyone. Today's main news, of course, we've got to talk about the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Link in the description, archived, of course. Trump signed an executive order establishing one. This is a good idea. Now, the original goal was to have effectively a firm associated with the strategic reserve to purchase things like Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin, but there's sort of an offshoot bundle, XRP, Solana, and so forth, either as well. This did not happen. The executive order simply says that the government is going to stockpile cryptocurrency that has been seized. It's been forfeited by people pertinent to legal cases. So if somebody is committing, fraud, they're doing drug sales or something, the cryptocurrency is then taken from them and put into a fund, basically. It's still a good idea because cryptocurrency, especially Bitcoin, is deflationary in nature to an extent. By the way, disclaimer, none of this is investing advice. I'm not an investment advisor or an accountant or something like that. These are just my personal opinions. It's weird how you have to say that actually when you're discussing the topic. It's still a good idea um, because, I mean, what are you going to do with the seized crypto? You're just going to destroy the flash drive that it's on or something like that? That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. And so briefly, Bitcoin was down quite a bit. Now it's recovering. And that's because it's just the status quo. The idea is novel. It's a good idea, but it doesn't really change anything to a meaningful extent. There were people that were hedging their bets on the government actually actively buying into things like Bitcoin, which would have skyrocketed its value. And I think the reason the government didn't decide to do that and instead decided to just say, look, we're going to, create a strategic reserve out of forfeited crypto. I think the reason is that it would toy with the economy on an enormous level. You'd have an enormous speculative run, I think, on Bitcoin, especially, probably increase its value by an order of magnitude. And that might, because it's just a bunch of zeros and ones as a technicality, it could screw with the actual value of the US dollar. I think that's the reason they avoided doing so. There is a sound economic reason for not doing so. Myself, I'm still very bullish on cryptocurrency, but I prefer to stack silver. Silver's having a good time, generally speaking, by the way, right now. Just saying. And things like that. I prefer to have the cash in hand. Like the cab driver some time ago partially paid the fare in silver, actually. He actually accepted it. Gave him a good deal on that one, by the way, because the silver was worth more than the fare was actually. And this is still a thing, actually, within the economy. You can do a little bit of things under the table, just saying. So the strategic reserve, again, a good idea. It's not what some people wanted, but they need to understand the economic ramifications of an enormous bull run on something that the government has then invested in. Were that to happen, it'd fry the economy potentially, depending on, the sum totals that were discussed. And so I think economic advisors told Trump maybe that's not the greatest of ideas. It's not what everyone wanted, but it was expected, by the way. It wasn't something that I was interested enough to make a prediction about, but I would have said, you know, based on what would happen to the value of the cryptocurrency should the federal government decide, yeah, we're going to invest like $50 billion a year in Bitcoin or something like, we're going to set up an entire mining center or something like that. The value of the currency would effectively hyper deflate more than anything else. And all of a sudden, you'd be minting a bunch of new millionaires with currency that they would inevitably sell some off, possibly to the government, and shit would get all fucked up. In fact, it would lead to the centralization of cryptocurrency under the US government more than anything else, and corporations, which is not necessarily an ideal scenario when you come to think of it. Smaller holders that have, a couple of Bitcoins all of a sudden would say, well, I'm wealthy enough to retire. You'd be taking a bunch of people out of the economy potentially at that point. You'd get some of it as tax revenue on the sale, of course. And beyond that, it would eventually there wouldn't be enough people holding it because so many of them would have sold it off for it to be actually transactionally useful more than anything else. I think it would actually ruin cryptocurrency if the plan had gone through, the one that was being discussed by some people. If they had gotten what they wanted, they would have made a shit ton of money, and then the economy would have problems as a result of it because of the massive amount of money that we're talking about. Bitcoin is worth, I believe it's about $85,000 per Bitcoin at the moment. It went up above 100K actually not that long ago, back in January. It was at 106 or thereabouts, I think. And so, if it suddenly goes to $1 million of Bitcoin, people who hold relatively small amounts, they've got like a Bitcoin or something like that, they're going to cash out. And then all of a sudden, the Bitcoin goes into the hands of people wealthy enough to buy Bitcoin, speculators, corporations, banks, and government. Well, now they hold that wealth. They've reabsorbed it into the centralized economy. It would be funny if in the future you had like Bitcoin welfare. So Bitcoin continues to rise and rise and rise, and all of a sudden the government says, well, shit, we're going to liquidate the part of the strategic reserve and give everyone a stimulus in Bitcoin or something like that. We may live to see horrors beyond our comprehension. I don't want Bitcoin to be centralized. Having the strategic reserve for the purposes of not squandering the wealth that's already been seized in criminal proceedings and civil proceedings, that makes sense. It's perfectly fine. But anything beyond that, I don't think necessarily would be a good idea. That's about all. Peace out.